From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Welcome to this very, very important and interesting lecture that we're going to have here today about December 21st, 2012, and the end of the world, or maybe not. I'm Barbara Tenenbaum. I'm the specialist in Mexican culture in the Hispanic division, and also I have something to do with the Kislak collection, which is the basis for the Exploring the Early Americas exhibit in the Jefferson Building, which is free and open to the public from 8:30 to 4:30, Monday through Saturday. So you really, if you haven't seen it, you should, because you will see Professor Van Stone's book there. After Professor Van Stone presents his lecture, he will, of course, answer questions. And since we're cybercasting this, please identify yourself prior to asking your question. And if you want to give your institutional affiliation, that would be nice too. All right, let me tell you, I have so many visual aids here. I mean, it's just amazing. Professor Mark Van Stone began his academic career he got his BA at Occidental College in California. He told me he was 10 years before President Obama did his 2 years at Occidental. He studied physics and world paleography, and he became, in effect, a professional calligrapher for 20 years, basically training calligraphers. Before he won his Guggenheim Fellowship to go around the world studying various alphabets. But Professor Van Stone had a different idea about alphabets than you usually think about it, because he looked at alphabets as art rather than in terms of their intrinsic meaning. And that's very interesting in and of itself. And if you go to the exhibit, you'll be able to see the beauty of the Maya alphabet and why it could be looked at from an art historical point of view. After he came back from his Guggenheim Fellowship, about 5 years later, he enrolled at the University of Texas in Austin to study Maya hieroglyphs and art history with the very, very well-known Linda Sheely, who unfortunately passed away far too soon. And he went on to to illustrate a book with Michael Coe. Some of you may remember Michael Coe from the Kislak lecture that he gave here several years ago. And they produced this book, Reading the Maya Glyphs. And he also gave me a copy of the book in Arabic, which was published by the Library of Alexandria, right? In Arabic, of course. Now, Professor Van Stone has gone on to work on this 2012 phenomenon, and if you go to the exhibit, you'll also see this book, 2012, Science and Prophecy of the Ancient Maya. And 2012 has also been featured in the Journal of Astronomy in Culture, that is volume 24 of Archaeoastronomy. And this issue is specifically dedicated to the Maya calendar and the 2012 phenomenon studies. So you might want to fill out an application form to get a copy of this. I'm looking forward to reading it, and those of you who are interested in 2012, I'm sure you'll look forward to reading it too. Currently, and for the last dozen years or so, right, Professor Van Stone has been a professor of art history at Southwestern College, and he tells me that he can look from his back window into Tijuana, which is gives you a different sense of the border than most of us have. And we look forward to this lecture and also to the questions. So without more talking on my part, let me present to you Professor Mark Van Stone.
Well, thank you very much, Barbara, and thanks to the Library of Congress for having me here and for advertising it so well that you're here too. I began my studies in Maya hieroglyphs because I was interested in their calligraphy, in their beautiful writing, and like Barbara said, I'm interested in writing as an art. One of the most interesting things about the writing of the ancient Egyptians and Maya and Chinese and several other cultures is that they used writing as a public display of power, of beauty, and so forth, even though the populace was nearly all illiterate, right? Literacy has never risen above 1% in most of the world until the 19th century, and yet Egypt is paved with hieroglyphs, and so is Maya country. And therefore, they had to make the writing something that appealed to a person who couldn't make out the meaning, which is to say they made it beautiful. And that's why the great calligraphies of the world are the cultures that had the greatest display of their writing, the Egyptians, the Maya, the Chinese. I became interested in the Maya phenomenon of 2012 about 4 or 5 years ago when I talked to my colleagues about this 2012 prophecy, and most of them said, "I want to run and hide through the whole year." They were afraid of the mismanagement of knowledge. There's a few things that the source of this, the source of this craziness actually started with scholars. The speculation in 1904 of a German scholar, I'm not sure if it was Schellhaus or Forstenmann, but he was looking at the last page of the Dresden Codex, which shows a snake, which represents the sky. It's got sky symbols on it, pouring water out of its mouth, and the moon goddess pouring water out of a bucket. It's called page 74 of the Dresden Codex. I may have a slide of it in here, but it's probably farther than I'll be talking today. And he said, and this is a great quotation to watch out for, "There can be no other interpretation but that this is the flood that ends the world, like Noah's flood." And frankly, there is another interpretation. There's always another interpretation. Watch out for that phrase. There's an event that happens in the tropics, especially the tropics of Mexico, called the annual rains, right? The coming of the rains is a big event. They have a dry season and a wet season. It's much more important than summer or winter. Am I too close? Can you hear me if I stand back here? Okay. Then I won't pop my peas so much. The spring rains are the most important event in the farmer's life, right? Because without them, the crops die. And so what probably the last page of the Dresden Codex represents is the life-giving rains that come every springtime, as opposed to the death-bringing rains of a monsoon flood or something like that. In any case, the Maya mention a couple of things that have given rise to some speculation by scholars, which one of them is, probably the most important one, is that the Maya calendar. How many people understand the Maya calendar here? A couple of tentative hands. The Maya calendar is not that different from our own. In fact, we should always say calendars with a plural because we have 3 calendars that we use that mix together. We have a very ancient calendar given to us by the Babylonians, which is the 7-day week. It's a cycle of days which are dedicated to different planets, which were, of course, gods, the sun, the moon, and if you speak Spanish, you know that the rest are Mercury, Venus, Mars, I'm not saying in the right order, Jupiter. The moving things in the sky are what the days of the week were named for, and these were gods to the Babylonians who invented the days of the week. The 365-day year is our civil calendar. It tells us what time of the year to plant, what time to harvest, and the year count that we use, this is the year 2012. It's 2012 years since the presumed birth of Jesus, which, by the way, the guys that originally invented the year count got it wrong. Jesus was born 4 BC. I think it's kind of ironic that a person would be born 4 years before his time. But anyway, the calendar, it should be a warning that even in our Western civilization, with all of its science and the great science of Constantinople in 525, when they invented the year count, Dionysius Exiguus was the scholar who did that. He miscalculated. We know this because the Roman records of history show us that Herod died in 2 BC, and that meant that if he was still alive when the wise men were looking for Jesus, it must have been previous to that. Also, I believe there's still some debate as to what that holy star was. Is that right, John? Lots of debate. We don't even know which celestial event was in the sky, the star that they were following. The point is this. We know this much about Roman history and about Judaic history, and we know this much about Maya history. And for us to presume that somebody said that that there was this prophecy, really, what shall I say? There's error when we know this much. Imagine how much room for error there is when we know that much. In any case, the reason that people say that the calendar ends in December 21st, 2012, is that the Maya year count, which was comparable to our count of 2012, began on a creation day 5,125 and 133, 5,125 years and 133 days ago. Pardon me. It's not yet 133 days. So anyway, 5,125 years and some days ago, the Maya calendar began. And instead of the year being 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, which counts 0 days, 0 months, 0 years, 0 score years, which is called a katun, and 0 score years, which is called a baktun. So 400 years, 20 years, months, and days. The date should be 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. But the Maya did not call it that. They called it 13, 0, 0, 0, 0. And that date, also around that date, they have historical events, what should I say, mytho-historical events, that were in the period before that they called 12 something, 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 12, 19, and so forth. The gods that created Palenque that we know the most about, their dates were just before this 1300. So their pre-creation, apparently there was a time of 5,000 years before the creation that ended. Does that make sense? Like a clock reaching midnight and starting over again. Now, because that clock reached midnight and started over again, many modern scholars and the people that follow them that are not so scholarly have presumed that the calendar, which reset to 0 and then started adding up again, when it reaches 13,000 again, will end, and there will be a new creation. And there's a bit of, what should I say, Aztec myth and lore and the Popol Vuh in the Maya history that tells us a little bit about what the Maya conceived of cycles of time. And so, I believe it was in 1965 with Michael Coe, the first publication of a scholarly popular book where he connected this long count calendar, which is now, by the way, this is the year 12, 19, 19, 14 something. It's very close to becoming 13,000 again. And when it does, in December of this year, there's a lot of different speculations as to what will happen. Not just among the internet crazies, but among scholars. Some of my friends believe that that the Maya expected the calendar to reset again to 0, but that they didn't expect any sort of world-ending cataclysm. There's really no evidence in Maya literature for a world-ending cataclysm. But there is a lot of scholars who firmly believe that they meant for the calendar to stop. On the other hand, when I went looking for evidence, I found that among the ancient Maya inscriptions, there are a few indications that they did not expect the calendar to stop, but to keep going. And many indications, shall we say, compared to the number of indications that talked about the calendar stopping and restarting, which is 0. So the Maya themselves did not yet. We haven't yet found a Maya scribe who wrote down that the year after 2012 would be 00001. In fact, there's evidence to the contrary. There's the number right there on my screen. There's also a monument, Tortuguero Monument 6. Let's see if I can get there here. This is the end of Tortuguero Monument 6, and there's a date. This says the end of 13 Baktuns, 13,000, 4 Ahau, 3 Kankin, which is a Maya date that represents maybe December 21st, 2012. Here's something else that we disagree on. Most of my scholar friends expect that the correlation between the Christian calendar and the Maya calendar is not 130000 is 21st, but the 23rd of December. And frankly, some scholars have come up with the recalculation that it's now the 24th. So you have 3 opportunities for the world to end this next month. In any case, the 21st is the most popular date that people use because it is also an astrologically fun day, right? It's I would say 99% of the internet speculation, I will call it generously, on the about the Maya calendar ending, puts the date the 21st because it makes an astrological connection. And it also makes a connection with the sky because the sun moves around the sky every year from our position. That's why we have the houses of the zodiac and so forth. And on December 21st of this year, the sun will enter. I don't even have a diagram of that. I don't have it easy. Oh, we may come across it. The sun lines up, from our point of view, the sun will eclipse the center of the galaxy. Not quite, it misses it by about 3 degrees. But the sun goes across the galactic plane on the 21st of December. And that so-called galactic alignment is something that you Google galactic alignment, you get a lot of 2012 websites. Because supposedly this event happens only once every 26,000 years. That's a bit of an exaggeration. It happens every December 21st. The sun has been spinning around the sky and crossing the galactic equator since the galaxy condensed out of interstellar dust. It's not a rare event at all, and that's one of the, what should I say, one of the least of your worries. Tortuguero Monument 6 is the text that I showed you. Let's see. We looked at it here. There we go. This text is, until this summer, was the only Maya inscription that mentioned the far future. And by the way, what it says, we have 4 Hau 3 Kankin. That's the date, December something, 2012. It will happen, is this glyph, and then it's broken. We call this Murphy's Law of Epigraphy. And then it says, Bologna-Octet, that's the name of a minor god here, is going to get dressed and it's broken. There's just enough of these glyphs surviving to actually get the general gist of it. But what it says is going to happen is that this god, Bologna-Octet, whose name means palace. Bologna-Octet literally means, it's spelled. This is the number 9, a bar with 4 dots on it. It's the number 9. Below it is a dog's head. And below that is the glyph for tree, 9-dog tree. Now, 9-dog tree doesn't sound like a palace, but in fact the word for house post, the thing that holds up the roof, is octet, which means, which is spelled with the dog, who's also pronounced ok. So 9 house posts. By the way, also the number 9 is kind of like our number zillions. It was the number that the Maya used to indicate a large number. So they're indicating a house that has many posts, maybe even an infinite number of posts, which would represent a palace or maybe even the whole sky. In any case, this 9-dog tree, the 9 house posts god, is going to put on a costume. And that's all it says. It doesn't tell us what costume he's going to put on. It doesn't tell us what ceremony he was going to do in this costume, because that's what Maya kings did. They dressed up in a costume and performed ceremonies. And in fact, anybody here been to Copan? Great, all the whole left side here. All those kings are standing there. And every one is dressed in a different costume. And what they're doing is channeling the gods. And that was the event that was to the Maya of Copan in particular, but also most of the Maya monuments represent a king dressing up as a god, channeling the god, bringing him to earth in this costume ceremony. So Bologna-Octet is going to do this very Mayan thing. But this is one of, now we found a second inscription. This is a drawing and a photograph of the new 2012 inscription found in June by the La Corona project, led by Marcello Canuto of Tulane University. They found a whole step of what had once been a large stairway of at least 3 and maybe 4 steps, very, very wide as this room. Each of the stairways was carved. Each of the panels of the stairway was carved. And the top two steps were looted by grave robbers in the 1960s. And the pieces are scattered in museums all over the world. And here's a cast of one of these steps. You can examine this, suitable for hanging. I actually have this for sale. This is several scholars, and I, including John Carlson, invested about $8,000 to buy these three things when they came up on the market 2 years ago. And we repatriated them to Guatemala. And now that they found a whole new step, they have a whole lot more to go with. The context of this, basically, it's a long history of the kings of La Corona and their relationship with the kings of Calakmul, which was the greatest Maya city. And in the middle of this stairway, which, by the way, is mysteriously out of order, the hieroglyphs, even though they were buried in ancient times, the stones, if you put them in order, would be like 1, 6, 3, 9, 2, 4, 8. It's like they were using them as decoration when they reset this stairway. They'd taken apart an inscription from somewhere else on the site and consolidated them together, but it was not important to them that it be readable, which is to say they probably did it very late in their culture when their school system was breaking down or something. The writing still had power. There's in the Kislak collection, there are many, many beautiful vases with inscriptions, and there are probably more vases with inscriptions that are not readable. They're made by somebody who's just doing squiggle, 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 because writing itself had this power, whether or not you could read it. Like I said, I was more interested in the visual effect and the emotional effect and religious effect of having writing on something more than what it actually said. And this happens a lot in Maya vases. In any case, then they found this inscription in the middle of it, a single stone, about half of which is flaked off, and it ends with the date 2012. I'll use a little arrow here. This little number 4 here, next to a king's head, is for a how. That is actually spelled the same word as this. This one here, the Tortuguero inscription, is what we might call minuscule letters, and this is like capital letters. They have very fancy ways of writing and very simple ways of writing. And this here, this 3 with the dog, this is the simple form of the dog glyph. So they actually had simple forms of the glyphs, but even the simple forms were much harder than our letters. So this date here is exactly the same as this date here. And then they tell us one thing. They don't tell us even the 4 glyphs that the Tortuguero monument says. And the one thing they tell us is 3 baktuns, which is to say 1,200 years. And what they're doing is arithmetic. They're saying that this date is 1,200 years after a date that was mentioned earlier in the inscription. And they don't tell us there's no verb, there's no subject. They're just telling us the time span. And that's really, most of what we call Maya prophecy is not really telling us anything important about the future. It's really telling us that, 300 years from now it's going to be a Thursday. It's like, okay, that's not prophecy, that's arithmetic. So this new inscription, as was announced when they announced this inscription, they put out many, many press releases about it. Everybody wanted to know about what's it say, what's it tell us, what information does it add. It adds very little of our information to us because it wasn't that important to them. I want you to notice that the king here, he's mentioned up at the top here. See this flamey thing sticking out the bottom of this glyph? This is a jaguar paw with a flame underneath it. It's the name of the king of Calakmul. And in the year 695, he was defeated in battle. And until this inscription was found, we thought he was killed. But here he is, after the battle, going around saying, I'm alive, I'm okay. I'm still defeated, but I didn't die. And he was crowned in the year 913,000, which is to say the 9 is the Baktun date, the 13 is the Katun date, and then 3 zeros. And that's, a date with 3 zeros comes every 20 years. And a king would celebrate a Katun ending by putting up its stela or painting the buildings or even adding a whole new layer to the pyramids. Every 20 years at a rich city, the buildings got bigger and bigger and bigger. It was a 20-year period, a Katun it's called, was a very important ceremonial celebration. And he calls himself, this is the number 13. See that? 3 dots and 2 bars is 13. This is the word for Lord, and this is the word for Katun. The 13 Katun Lord, which means that he was crowned in the 13th Katun. He's like he associated himself with a time period with a 13 on it. And that is probably why he's linking himself to the next date that has a major 13 in it, which is 130000. Does that make sense? It doesn't make much sense to us, but that was to them was like major juice. So he associates himself with that date because he was crowned during the 913-000. And that's all he says. I liken the way that the Maya talk about the future. They also talk about the past. And what they're doing is sort of throwing out guy lines to anchor themselves in time. Here in the future is a date that relates to my date, and here in the past is a date that relates to my date. And I'm right here in the middle. I'm part of the fabric of time and so forth. But anyway, that's it. And we may find more. I mean, we'll certainly find more if we keep digging, because one of the great things about Maya archaeology is that we have 1% penetration. 99% of Maya history and archaeology is still waiting to be dug up. Even with the grave robbers, 10 times as efficient at finding treasure as the archaeologists, there's so much more to be found out. So we looked at those two things. The Chilambalam books, the third item in my little list, is a prophecy books that were written in the 1600s, 1700s, and even the 1800s in the highlands of Guatemala. Chilambalam is a title. It means interpreter jaguar. And the Chilambalam of Chumayel, that's one in Princeton, right? I think it is. It's like, I got this off of an Ohio State University website, which has made a facsimile of this book. And it talks about, among other things, Khatun prophecies. Remember, Khatun is a 20-year period. And the two prophecies on this page on the right are the prophecies for the Khatun in 1740 and the Khatun of 1760. And this one here is the Kan Ahau Khatun, which means the four Ahau Khatun, which is the Khatun that ends with the date 4 Ahau, which we're in. We're in one. Remember, the date's 4 Ahau 3 Kankin. The last day of the Khatun is the name of the Khatun. So in the Khatun of 4 Ahau, do I have a description here? It says several things. It says that Quetzal will come back. The green bird shall return. It says Quetzalcoatl will come back for another time. It says that Ahkantenal will come. Ahkantenal means he of the yellow tree place. And Kante, yellow tree, is a specific species of tree. I think it's medicinal. But anyway, this god is associated with medicine. And it tells us that blood vomit will come. So watch out. This actually should have been happening from 1992 to 2012. 1992 to 2012 is the Khatun that we're in. We should have been experiencing the blood vomit plague, which the Maya did experience in the 4 Ahau Khatun before this. This book was written around 1740. They were maybe in this Khatun when they wrote it, but they were looking back to the previous Khatun 4 Ahau, which happened 256 years earlier, at which time Yucatan was experiencing the plagues brought by Columbus. Those germs that those guys brought off that boat were already ravaging Yucatan even before Columbus set foot on Yucatan, because they had trade back and forth to Hispaniola or wherever he did land. The next one after that, 1760, is the 2 Ahau Khatun and so forth. But I want to say that there are 13 named Khatuns. There's a Khatun 1 Ahau, 2 Ahau, 3 Ahau, 4 Ahau. It goes up to 13. And they're not in that order, though. The Khatuns are nearly all dire. I mean, having blood vomit and Quetzalcoatl is actually, what should I say, the balance is in the good for us. But 9 out of the 13 prophecies of the Khatuns that the Maya give us are dire, And I think one of them is that our rulers will be corrupt. Oh, there's a prophecy you can count on. Another is that there will be starvation. It's like, okay, these are safe bets. In any case, that is the prophecy we have, and that's pretty much the sum total of my prophecy. That arithmetic prophecy and these Chilambalams, which were written, by the way, hundreds of years after the Spanish arrived, and these people were rebuilding the smidgens of their culture that were left. now that they're firmly under the heel of the Spanish. I should also point out, this is the text that we just looked at, a drawing, and the red glyph here, it says the end, that's just a verb ending, of the 13, that's blue, Baktun, okay? And then there's the 4 Half Kankin date. And it's actually the same phrase that they use when they're talking about the creation date, the end of the 13 Katun. This is in a text of 4 Half 8 Kumku, which is 3114 BC. And it's the most complete text we have of the creation myth. I like to describe the, imagine if you had a Holy Bible and you wrapped it around a hand grenade and set it off, and then picked up, the little shreds of paper that were left, and you got maybe 3 of them. That's how much myth we have from the ancient Maya. The Spanish suppress it, they burn their books and so forth. And this little smidgen, we have a sentence here and a fragment there, and this is actually the longest text we have on a stone monument about the creation. It says 130000, 4 Half Kankin. It was set in order. The edge of the 3 stones place. It was the end of the 13th Baktun. And this guy oversaw the job. His name was the 6th Sky Lord. And the job that's described in those 3 dots, which I've left out, I'm afraid, is that one god places a stone in the sky, another one places it on the earth, another one places it in the sea. And those 3 stones, let's see, where's the 3 stones here? I know that I have them. There we go. This is a Maya hearth. 3 stones around a little fire pit. And when you're building a house, the first thing you do is you make a place to cook so that you can feed the builders while they finish the house. And so the 3 stones place is making a metaphor of house building as a metaphor of universe building. Does that make sense? And the little griddle's called a kamal, and there's a reflection of it in the sky, at least according to Linda Shealy's Maya Cosmos. There's the 3 stars of Orion that form a really nice triangle called the Summer Triangle, Alnitak, Saif, and Rigel. In the middle of those 3 stars is a fuzzy spot, which you can see if you're away from the city, which is a star factory. It's the nebulae of M42 and M43 in Orion. And the Maya apparently saw that as a smoky fire in the middle of 3 stones. So that's try to make the stones land right on the stars. So that metaphor for creation is what's going on with the, this text, the 3 stones of creation. And whenever you see a stone monument with an inscription on it, dated 3114 BC, dated the creation, they talk about the 3 stones. And in fact, the stones themselves, the stone monuments, are it's a reflexive, self-reflexive text. They're often in 3s, and they will call themselves the jaguar stone, the snake stone, and the shark stone to represent the 3 places where the stones were placed. And the 3 temples at Palenque. Anybody been to Palenque? Those 3 pyramids in the cross group are representing the 3 stones as well. We often see triadic arrangements in Maya history, which is a reflection of this. So I've already talked a little bit about this. Not much data. We've got 99% of Maya culture and history still underground, not counting what the Spanish burned and not counting what was destroyed when the Maya collapsed in 900 AD. Long before the Spanish came, the Maya were, fallen like the Romans. And the contradictory phrase is the Maya calendar end date, if you want to call it that. If you believe that 1300 represents an end date, is coming in 2012. The Aztec date of the creation is 4 Olin, and the year 4 Olin comes around every 52 years, and the next 4 Olin year is 2027. So mark my words, you're just going to, after 2012 passes and people go, oh, the world didn't end, they're going to start saying, but we got another chance in 2027. And probably, there's also the end of the nice round number of the Hebrew calendar that's coming up, and there's lots of ends of the world. Plus, the Quetzalcoatl's return, according to the Aztecs, is not 2012 and is not 2027. It's 2039. So here's another end of the world you can wait for. All based on Mesoamerican stuff. Manipulated means that the Maya and the Aztecs and all the Mesoamerican peoples they did not have an inerrant Bible, right? We are so drenched in Judeo-Christian tradition here in this continent that even if you're not a Christian scholar, if you're a Jewish scholar or a Muslim scholar, you have the same problem. But even if you're a Buddhist scholar or an atheist scholar, you have this idea that the book is solid, right? You don't change the meaning of something. The Aztecs and the Maya, they were like, hey, let's change things. They would mess with it. They would mess with text. We have the king Kanbalam of the Maya. Kan means snake, Balam means jaguar. That's two of the three throne stones. And he actually has he's the one that built that triadic arrangement in Palenque. And he portrays an altar with three heads on it that elsewhere, and the heads are built on the ends of thrones, and these three thrones elsewhere represent the three stones of creation, the jaguar, the snake, and the shark. And if you look very carefully at his monument, it has a jaguar in the front and two snakes. The question is, where's the shark? Well, his name wasn't Jaguar, Snake, Shark. His name was Jaguar, Snake. He changed this trinity into a duality. I was going to say dunity. He changed this trinity into duality because it was like, hey, I'm the three throne stones. There's only two. They had no qualms about doing that. That's like changing, Adam and Eve's role or any of the myths that we hold dear, just switching things around. They manipulated them entirely. And one of my favorite Mesoamerican heroes is Tlacaelel. Tlacaelel was the power behind the throne of four of the Aztec emperors. He was the Giovanni de Medici, if you will, that controlled things. And when the Aztecs took over Azcapotzalco in the 1420s, they went through this palace saying, oh, wow, this place is ours now. And in the library of the palace, they found books that talked about the Aztecs in the most denigrating of terms. They smelled of dog feces, and they wore skins and things like that. And they said, what are we going to do with this? What are we going to do with these beautiful books but say such terrible things about us? Tlacaelel says, burn the whole lot, rewrite it. In fact, while we're at it, let's burn our own books. And this is the first time we have an opportunity to rewrite history. And so they did. Tlacaelel convinced them to take a place like the Library of Congress, burn it down, and rewrite everything so that it made the Aztecs look good. He was an even greater book burner than Diego de Landa. Anyway, they would manipulate scriptures all the time. They didn't have this scripture at all. Like I said, scholars disagree. And here's something else. The Maya never corrected errors. There are many, many inscriptions in which the Maya say things like, it was a Tuesday. 5 days passed, and it was a Monday. Now, this doesn't take long for you to figure out that the guys miscalculated. And when they made a mistake like that, apparently they thought that God was speaking through the error, and they would leave it. A card laid was a card played. There's no evidence in any stone inscription that the Maya ever erased and rewrote anything, including many opportunities where they could have. Because the way you write a number like 3 dots, and the way you write a number like 1, that better not be my phone. Anyway, the way the Maya write a number 3 is 3 dots. And somebody would say that, 3 days, 3 months, something like that later. And if they miscalculated, the way they write a number 1 is with a dot and 2 little hollow rings. And so to correct 3 to 1 is very easy. All you do is hollow out the 2 things. And there's errors like that where the number, I think it's number 18. And it's 3 bars and 3 dots, and the 2 months are 16 months apart. It's very easy to fix that, but they didn't. And they didn't because it was a card played. And so errors accumulate when you don't correct them. And there's tons of errors. The Maya so-called prophecies never mention destruction. There is the Popol Vuh, which talks about the previous worlds in which the gods destroyed the people, but they don't talk about the future ever having any destruction. And I'll skip life and calendar. Solstices are not significant. Remember, people are thinking about the alignment of the sun and the galaxy happens on the winter solstice, so that's kind of cool. But the Maya, they looked at solstices in an interesting as something interesting way back early in their history, but they sort of gave that up because there are many other things that are more important, like the coming of the spring rains. And like I said, 1% penetration. And as for life in the calendar continuing to 4772, I'm now going to spend the rest of the next 4 hours translating this for you. Actually, we're looking only at the first 4 double columns. The Maya wrote in pairs of columns. By the way, the reason that they wrote, they're the only culture that has a writing system that doesn't go either like this, or like this, or like this. Okay? They divide into pairs of columns. I think it's because they saw their writing as grains of corn. And if you go to the store and look at one of those ears of corn they have for sale, especially the health food store, you can peel them off and look inside. You can count the rows, and you'll find ears of corn that have 16 rows or 18 rows or 14 rows, never 13, never 15, never 17. And in fact, they're a little bit offset. You'll see that the grains of corn are always growing in pairs of rows. I think that the reason the glyphs are shaped this way and the reason that they're arranged this way, and some stela are even shaped like mazorcas, like ears of corn, is because they saw themselves as, the corn was the staff of life. Corn was, well, we call it maize. Corn is actually a more generic term. Maize was the staff of life, and to them maize was everything. The gods created humanity in this creation out of maize. We're all actually kind of tamale. So here's the first 4 columns of this text, and it has several interesting events in it. This is all a history of the city of Palenque up to the time of Piccol, who's buried underneath this inscription, by the way. This is his epitaph. And then it talks about his glorious reign, and then it talks about the future. So here's an event that happened 137 years after his death, or should I say will happen. What it says, actually, is the date will be 100000. Can you see those numbers at all? I really should blow them up, but this date here is the Maya date 10000, which is 830 AD. This was carved in 682, so it was 130 years in their future. And it's a nice round number. They actually looked ahead a few years after his death, and they looked ahead 30 years after his death. And they predict what's going to happen on all these future dates is that there will be a ceremony appeasing the hearts of the gods. They call it a period-ending ceremony, and appeasing the hearts of the gods is what you do at a period ending. Thank you, we're so happy with you. Here's some blood and corn. And the gods are usually satisfied by that. But they're basically saying that Piccol, after his death, will continue to appease the gods. And just to make sure that we know that he's going to do it for a long time, they jump ahead 9 years, then they jump ahead 137 years. Each of these is a period ending. And then they jump ahead, they skip back and connect they skip ahead to 4,000 years. But let's go back. The next event they talk about is the crowning of a god, which relates to the crowning of the king Piccol 1,000,000 years in the past. And one of the cool things about this number is it's not just 1,000,000 years ago. The Sumerians talked about things happening in 60,000, 130,000, things like that. The Maya said it didn't just happen 1,000,000 years ago. It happened 1,246,826 years and 64 days in the past. And that number of days, by the way, if you look at that number, it's usually numerologically interesting. It'll be a nice, It'll be a nice multiple of sometimes 360 days, which was this is the length of their calculating year. It'll be a multiple of 584 days, which is the cycle of Venus. It'll be a multiple of 260 days sometimes. If it's 260 days, it should have the same day of the week on it. It'll be a multiple of the 819 days, which was a cycle that was 7 times 9 times 13. They connected events that were significant by numerologically significant numbers. Huge numbers. And they did this, calculations with these millions and millions of days, because they could. They're one of the few ancient peoples that had place value system and zero, which allows you to count basically to infinity if you want. The Romans can't do that. The Romans, the Jewish number system, the Greek number system, all those are based on the alphabet. right? Alpha is 1, beta is 2, gamma is 3, and so forth. The Romans have an I for 1 and an L and a V for various, but they don't have any way of writing 60 million. They never needed to write 60 million. They might say 60 times a million, that sort of thing. But they never had a way of writing precise numbers in large numbers. The Maya did. And this is kind of like that argument they say about nuclear proliferation. We have the bomb. We've got to use it, right? The Maya had place value at 0, and so it became this tenet of their religion to flaunt it. They have these, in fact, if you look at a Maya inscription, usually 50% or more is just numerical measurements. Dates, this date happened, this date happened so much longer. And then, the Leyden plaque, which is a celt, a piece of jade that someone wore here, had a belt with 3 of these things. They're called Tinklers. They clank against each other. And the Tinklers has the date taking up the top 70% of the text is the date. And then it has 2 glyphs saying he was crowned, and then it has the name of the king. So it's like the 30% that has the name of the king is less important than the date he was crowned on. Their fixation on time is phenomenal. In any case, so they connect him with a crowning of a god in the past who's called the Zero Square-Nosed Critter. That's his nickname. That's the glyph in the far right in the blue box around it. Not quite far right, second from the right at the top. But his name actually means the primordial sustenance god. Now we can translate that. And here's the event in the future that he's counting to. If you look here, this glyph is the date of his coronation. Can you see if I use a little arrow? Like that? This is the date of the coronation of Piccol in the year 613 AD. And here's the same date. And it happens to fall 8 days after a period ending that's like 100000. This is a 6-digit number in base 20. I talked about base 20 and base 10, right? We count in tens because we got 10 fingers. The Maya went barefoot. They counted in base 20. So this is a date which is like an odometer going over to 1,000,000 miles. It's a 6-digit number, And very, very close to that date, 8 days after it, is an anniversary of Piccol's coronation. It's not just any anniversary. It's 52 years times 80, which is, again, numerologically significant. So they're basically saying that in the year 4772 AD, that Piccol will still be celebrated. They're telling us the status quo is going to continue. They're also telling us, by the way, that this date of 1,000,000 here is going beyond 130000, right? Our date, 13 Baktuns, is not going to go back to 0 Baktuns because this date here is 14, 15, 16, 17, on up to 20. And when you get to 20, you get to this 6-digit number. So they're telling us that the calendar doesn't end and the status quo will not end. And I take great comfort in this. Of course, they missed the conquest. I do not take comfort in that. So you can't really count on their prophecies. To remind everyone about the what should I say, the progress of cultures in the Americas, here's what the Olmec, the mother culture, this is where they lived about the time, basically between the time of Tutankhamun and Socrates. And the Maya lived here, completely different language. They were the heirs to the culture of the Olmecs in the same way that the French royalty is the heir to the Roman Empire, in the same way that the Roman architecture is an heir to Greek architecture. But they're 1,000 years later. The Maya lived between the 1st and the 7th centuries AD. They spread to this area by 900 AD, and then they collapsed. And here's where the Aztecs lived. Again, each of these cultures spoke a language that are as different from each other as they are from English. There's cultural manifestations which move through the history, but each one is very different. There's the Comal, there's the stars. And when you see the Aztec calendar as a symbol of the Maya calendar, what I'm talking about? That down in San Diego, it's on the back of every van as a kind of an emblem, big decal. This is the Maya version of that. The Aztec calendar has the head of Tonatiuh in the center, and around him is the 20 days of the Aztec week and the 4 creations of the previous creations of the Aztec world. This one has, this is a page, the Madrid Codex, and it has the 20 days of the Maya week. By the way, they're not in order like they are on the Aztec one. And then it has 260 dots in this little zigzag path, which makes it kind of a 4-petaled Maltese cross type flower. And on the corners are the days in the Maya calendar, which tell us what day they are. There's usually 13 dots between these corners. That's 260 days. That's the cycle of the Maya sacred calendar. So this really is a calendar page. And this is what should be on the back of the, what should I say? This is what should be on the cover of all those books about 2012 instead of the Aztec calendar. And interestingly, this is the Maya version of it. In each of the 4 directions, it says south, north, west, east. We have gods doing ceremonies for 5 pairs of gods. Here's a version that's a Mixtec version of it. The gods are doing ceremonies are all venerating trees. And each is a different species of tree with a different species of bird growing out of a different base. And the guy in the middle is connected to them with, connected to the corners with streams of blood. Here we have a head decapitated. Here we have an arm that's cut off. Here we have a leg that's cut off. And here we have a rib cage. This is the god Tezcatlipoca, who was a great Maya god. Tezcatlipoca means smoking mirror. This is the mirror that was attached to where his foot should be. And he's cut up and set in the 4 corners of the universe in this same diagram. The Aztec version of this diagram is a bit tidier because the Aztecs were on the ascendant and the Maya were kind of decadent. But have I run out of time? I knew it. I could tell by the people streaming out. I could go on and on and on. But the point is this. The Aztecs and the Maya were fabulous astronomers, fabulous calendrists, but they were not great prophets. They were certainly not prophets of something happening in 2012. And frankly, the connection between 2012, which was made up by 20th century scholars, is tenuous at best. I don't doubt, because the Maya were in many city-states, as different from each other as the Greek city-states. They loved each other like the Athenians loved the Spartans. They probably had very different calendar priests in different cities, and we may find an inscription yet that says, in 2012, better watch out. We haven't found it yet, though. I think that every piece of information we have says that the Maya at least told us not to worry about 2012. Thank you. And now I hope I've left enough time for a few questions. You mean I covered everything? Yes?
What did you mean when you said the Aztecs were in the ascendant and the Maya decadent?
This painting was made about 1500. It's in the Madrid Codex, which was a book that was collected by Cortez, and it was new when he had it. The Maya were already, what should I say, they had been, the fall of the Maya, if you will, had happened in about 600 years earlier. So the reason that this is kind of funky looking is because it's made by artists who didn't have a lot of money. Whereas over in Aztec country, this is actually south of Aztec country, in Mixtec country. Notice how neat and tidy everything is. They also are very neat and tidy in the way that they arrange the universe. There's one quarter that's yellow, and one that's red with green dots, and one that's dark, that's black, and one that's blue with white dots. The colors of the directions, the fact that there's the same kind of arrangement, there's just much tidier. Because the Aztecs, they loved order. And they were, shall I say, on the ascendant. Well, yes?
This is a loaded question. Where are you going to be on December 21st, 2000?
You remember that cenote I showed you at the beginning? That's where I'll be. It's in the place called Iquil, south of Chichen Itza. By the way, there's going to be, Ed Barnhart runs a website called mayaexploration.org or something like that. Just look for Maya Exploration as one word. And he is going to have webcasts on December 21st, 2012 from Chichen Itza, from Tikal, from Palenque, and Copan, all day. So you can, and Chichen Itza, you may know, is like the most popular destination in Mexico. I think more tourists go there than anywhere else, and that's on an off day. Imagine what it's going to be like on the 21st of December. I'll be right there at ground zero. I urge you all to, the reason I wrote this book and the reason that I wrote my little, actually have a digital book, which I forgot to mention, but if you go, there's a flyer in the back for my book, and I want to plug my digital book, which is got the same title, Science and Prophecy of the Ancient Maya, and you can buy it only for the iPad, and I don't have time to show it to you, but it has more moving pictures than it has still pictures. It has interactive features, which are really cool. And I'm delighted to be part of the next generation of publishing. It has 13 scholars, including John Carlson, and in 52 video interviews embedded in the book. There's 2 hours of video interviews in addition to the text that you read, and then there's pictures that you can manipulate. The timeline, for instance, that I did is all one picture. You just scrub your finger across and the colors change. Anyway, it was a lot of fun to work on a digital interactive book, and it's only available on the iPad because nobody else has the technology to play such a thing yet, but it's coming. So thanks for. If you want to look for my book, look at mvs2012.com. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.